My name is Monica Gleberman, and you're listening to Silence on Set podcast. On today's podcast, we have Michael Lombardi from a new film called The Retaliators. He plays John Bishop, which is a pastor who uncovers a dark and twisted underworld as he searches for answers surrounding his daughter's brutal murder. In addition to being in the film, Michael Lombardi is also one of the producers. So here's Michael to talk about the film, the music, and how he was able to, well, deal with all of that blood.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you.
I'm so excited to talk with you. So, this film I found relatable in certain ways. Obviously, yes, it's a, crazy film. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in there. But I want to start off before we really get into it. I want to start off about your character and how you ended up playing John Bishop. Like, how did it come to you?
Many years ago, early 2000s to mid 2000s, I had a record deal. I had a little band, I had a record deal. My music manager, I was out in California at the time. I'm an East Coast guy, but I go out there often. And I was there. He said to me, "Hey, man, I want you to go write with these two brothers. They're really talented guys." And they had a band, a big band too, and a record deal. So I used to drive about 2 hours south. They live in Southern California. I'd drive down and I started writing with them. And our tastes were just so aligned. Like we collaborated so well, and we really enjoyed the process with one another. But cut to several years go by. I don't talk to them. I'm on the East Coast. They're on the West Coast. And I had to do a big charity event. This is about 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago. And I called Darren and I said, "Hey, Darren, that song we wrote, When Heaven and Hell Collide, I have to drop it a half step for this event. My band's not here. What do you think? What have you been up to? Blah, blah, blah." And he goes, "Oh, my brother and I have been writing screenplays." And I said, "Send them to me," because I knew how creative these guys were and how much I loved what they did. So he sends them all to me. I read The Retaliators and I fell in love with it. I'm like, I have to make this movie. I saw all these elements that we'll probably talk about, but in the script that I started talking to him about. And he's like, "Yeah, yeah, we wrote that. That's for that. Yeah, you got that." And then I was on a plane 4 or 5 days later. So it brought the script to Alan Kovac, who's the CEO and founder of Better Noise Music, which is a huge record label. He said, "Michael, let's do this. You want to make the movie? I got you. And let's put music in it. Let's give it that great wink to the 80s and the 90s that it deserves." And that's how it happened. Now, those guys always had me in mind for John Bishop. Um, but it was still hard to finally get there to be the guy who is John Bishop at the end, to actually be cast.
Wow, that's so crazy. That's such a crazy story to kind of end up kind of full circle back with them again.
It's crazy, and there's a lot of crazy angles to this. And again, we only have so much time. I could talk all day about it, but this story is inspired by something tragic that happened to their sister. I don't know if you know that part, and it touches upon that concept. What would you do if you had a minute alone? It's revenge, it's retaliation. And they wrote this script sort of as therapy in a creative way. The movie's not about what happened to the sister. She's fine now, but it was a very brutal attack that happened to her when she was younger, and they never found the guy. So they went through years of court and trying to heal, and they wrote this concept. Now, get this, talk about serendipitous. I was on a television show called Rescue Me. Okay, it's about New York City firefighters post 9/11.
Of course, I
Okay,
saw you. I loved you on that show. Of
thank you
course.
so much. So I played the Pro B rookie firefighter,
Mhm.
right? Turns out Darren and his brother never knew this about their sister Jody. And I never knew this, of course, until recently. I'm done filming. Her favorite television show was Rescue Me. She was in firefighter training school when this happened to her at 18 years old. She was a probie during the time that Rescue Me was on, and I was a probie, and I was her favorite character. it helped her heal and laugh and have fun. She talks about it. Like she'll go, you should interview her. It's she's so she talks. It helped her heal. She saw that in that show. What I loved, what Dennis Leary did was you showed these guys, they're heroes at the end of the day for what they're do, but they're flawed. And it made her feel okay to have baggage and stuff. And then now get this, cut to today, to Hero's story. She just became one of the only female firefighter captains in America. So yeah, she made it. And to be the lead in the movie that is inspired by her is just so crazy and serendipitous. It's mind blowing.
Yeah, I did read that it was, based or inspired off a true story. I do a lot of research before these interviews, so I read that, but I didn't hear that whole story. But I will say on a side note, for Rescue Me, you were one of my favorite characters. And
Oh, thank
Dennis Leary
you.
did a great job. That was such a great, and I feel like it's very similar to the tone of this film in that it's so real. Like it feels like you're kind of in it. It's almost like a documentary. It just feels like you're like breathing it. So it's a very similar tone between the two, which is kind of ironic. But
Wow, thank you so much.
you're so, oh my God, you were so good in Rescue Me. I would go on a whole tangent with you about that, but I was so excited to see you in this one. So for your, that's really crazy though, that story to kind of circle into playing. I mean, that's nuts. When you finally like sit down, yes, all right, I'm playing this guy. He goes on quite an arc from the start to the end. But when you read it, how do you prep as an actor for two things? One, to play a pastor, right? And you're playing this good guy, you're not supposed. I love one of the lines he says where you're giving your speech at the church and your daughter's like, please don't bring me up, please don't bring me up, which is, so I feel like such a typical thing a daughter would say, like, please don't bring me in front of the church. And then you start talking about it and you're saying, listen, this guy did this thing with the tree and he tried to steal my tree, and like, I'm doing a horrible paraphrasing, but your point was, how did I respond? And you said with words, and you told him Merry Christmas, which I will circle back to, of course, but you said Merry Christmas to him. And it was just show like, not, you don't always have to hit violence with violence type of thing. And then something happens with your daughter. So before we get to that part, as an actor, how do you prepare to play a pastor, bishop, priest, father, whatever you want to call it, a dad, and then play the beginning role portion of where you don't believe in retribution or making your own justice?
Good. So we're going to talk about just this part of my preparation first. Okay. So to begin with, to put it like the most simplest way, and thank you for your thoughtful question. I went to some modern day sermons. I studied some modern day pastors. They do have bands now. It's sort of crazy, like the way they dress, they're human, and it's a nice way to spread the word, I think, and give a sermon. So I did go, and I went to some. I think I went to two in Philadelphia, one in New Jersey, and I just sort of snuck in and watched it. And one thing that was a really good shoe-in for me there was the writers had in the description about John Bishop, my character. His name's John Bishop. He's a rock star in his community and in this environment. Like when he gets on stage and gives the sermon. So I was just kind of like, he's open to the people. He's there to help. When I gave the sermon, I just tried to I played with the extras like you wouldn't believe. I think that part of the character comes a little easier to me because I think, with my character on Rescue Me Too, I get this often, and I think as an actor we have to be self-aware of who we are and who we can play and I get that, like, there's like something in my eyes people say is sweet or this and that. So I felt like, okay, I've got this, and that's why the writers wanted me for the part. So I felt pretty good about all that, and I think I've done a lot since Rescue Me, so I think I've become much more open and can sort of command the attention if I need to on stage, like John Bishop does when he's giving a sermon. You learn a lot. I've been acting a long time now. I think when I started out, I was in a much different place, but in terms of this, giving the sermon, I just went for it, and there were whatever there were, out 100 extras, I think, and I just started having fun and joking and improvising and playing with them all and giving the sermon and just being very open. And like I improvised that line about, and it's funny, I bring it up because people have said they liked it. Hey, don't be surprised if I show up to next week's sermon with blue hair, because it's such like a dad joke, because it's kind of ridiculous that this sick band, they're from Ashes to New, by the way, the band, in the they're a real band in the. So it was just like fun. I just had fun with it, you know, I really did.
And it's so funny you should say that, because I think I've seen you in a bunch of stuff. I do think maybe in the beginning they were like, oh, he has like kind eye. You have a very kind face, kind demeanor. So that's probably why you started getting those type of roles. But it's vastly different if you've seen a lot of your work recently. So you've cut like, I definitely think you've broken out of that box for sure. This movie in particular really takes you out of that box. So
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's
you're
not easy to
you're
do.
so good. But
Thank you.
okay, so for preparing for that,
Mhm,
now you have a daughter, right? In the movie.
mhm,
Katie Kelly plays Sarah, your daughter,
mhm.
and you get the phone call that a parent never wants to hear, right? Something's going on, something's wrong, someone's following her, there's an emergency, which by the way, Katie taught me. Right away, I was like, okay, so next time I'm at a gas station, if I hear something weird, don't look, just go, call police. I was like, don't look, don't do anything. I don't hear anything. Just
Oh
call police
my
when I leave.
God, that's great.
I learned that pretty quickly. I was like, oh Jesus, like that. I never want that to
Mhm.
happen to me.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but this horrible thing happens. You get this phone call. Your character shows up. Something horrible happens to her. So now it
Yeah.
puts you on a completely different path. That moment changes your character in a split second. So
Mhm.
now preparation for that. How do you go from what you just prepared for and what you show on the screen and this really nice, likable guy, cute dad jokes, right? Has other kids, wife, all this stuff. That moment happens and your entire life, character, arc, everything changes in that second. So what do you do as an actor to do that, to shift?
Great. You want the exclusive? I've never, I don't think I've.
Sure. I'm a nerd for this kind of stuff, so I'll ask you all the dirty questions.
Okay, cool. So basically, what I did, so this character, he's actually a single dad. Like he's got his teenage daughter he's left with, and his youngest daughter, right? And he's trying to do his best as a single dad of two daughters, right? So I thought, how do we get where do we find this? The story is about, I think the provocative question and the foundation of this whole film is, what would you do if you had a minute alone with the person who hurt your loved one, right? So, how does he get to want that minute so badly when he's a man of the cloth and he's such a nice guy and he's preaching the Lord's word and he's open and it's about love and, some of the same guidelines I live. I'm not religious like that, but that's how I live my life, being an open and loving person and loving people. And how do you get to such anger or wanting to do that, especially if we know how, because someone hurts someone. So I get that primal feeling, right? That primal instinct. It's the oldest type of storytelling. It's like Shakespeare writing about love, right? I understand that. But the anger that he gets, right? And what he has to do to find this new person that was buried deep within. So I thought about some backstory to this character and I said, how can we build this guy? And I said, maybe he wasn't always a good guy. Maybe he became a man of the cloth because he met his wife, because he was going down the wrong track, the wrong road, and his wife's dad was a pastor or religious, and she helped him see the light and made him on the be a good person, and then he loved it so much that he was then able to preach it. But when she died, maybe it was cancer, maybe it was sudden, right? This is and I made choices. I'm just throwing out a bunch of ideas that I was doing when I to start building on. And then you use this imaginary circumstance, of course, right, as an actor, and you build from that. But but I so maybe she died, and then his oldest daughter resembles his wife. So like that's his treasure. Like his world was crushed. Now So that's what causes him. Like every time I looked at Katie in the role, I would think of my wife. That I all built this in my,
That's a
my
great backstory to build though, because that would logically make sense.
because then he has it in here. It's not that he's choosing to be passive at the Christmas tree lot and at the beginning. He's not a wimp. He's choosing that. And I think what's interesting about me is always playing the probie and stuff and the firefighter. I got that rap, but I grew up in a pretty rough area. It's amazing that I turned out to be like nice or whatever, but I had my share of fights in real life when I was a kid, and I'm a pretty physical guy. But so it's interesting because I knew that I could tap into that as an actor given the circumstances and as a person. But how do you make this character believable? So built that backstory, and then then you let it all go. But I also thought maybe like he was in a bar fight when he was a youngster and he punched a guy and the guy hit his head and died, or almost did, and then he had to go through this healing. And so there's some kind of anger somewhere built in him that he's had to now bury. And I thought that his wife was the catalyst behind that, the reason why. His therapist, and then his daughter resembles his wife, so when she died, that's all he had, and now this happens to her, and he's
Yeah, and it's like re-trauma, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like double trauma because he dealt with that and kind of figured out a way to get past it by being a priest or past, getting involved, and then you get hit again. It's like, how many times can you get hit before you kind of revert back to maybe something you were doing before? I think that's a perfect. I think that makes complete sense for a backstory to build it up to explain his reasoning for it. And even if there's no backstory, there's reason for it. I mean, when you watch it, even with knowing nothing, I always say, like, when I watch these kind of movies, or you'll watch Dateline, right? Or just anything. And you
Yeah.
always go, well, I wouldn't do that. Well, I don't know. Like, would I do that? And you really just don't know until you're put in that position. And so your backstory to me 100% makes sense as an actor. And that's how you got from the beginning into that moment where the tone just totally changes. But in terms of not even knowing that information, you were that good that you can just watch it and go, I get him. Like, I understand this horrible thing happened. I would want to do that too. Like, I understand where he's coming from.
Yeah,
He's
thank
such a
you.
great job doing that.
Oh, thank you. And again, like, I remember being little and thinking, oh my God, if someone ever hurt my parents, like, what would you do? And you can tap into that, I think. I was just trying to really have it layered, especially with her, because maybe she was the glue holding it together too, because she reminded me of my wife, whatever. But there was just a lot of that, because I always wanted to find truth in it. And then when I was playing, you let all that go, but you hope it's there because you built a lot of time thinking about it. But yeah, and I think, again, that primal instinct. But then the question is, if you were really in front of this human being, could you really hurt someone? Like, could you deal with the blood? Could you like poke someone's eye or whatever it is? That's another story, like, oh, and then I did one other thing you should know too. This was cool. I watched on YouTube. I went to this video I found somehow. It was a guy, looked like a mathematician, right? A slight guy. He's sitting there and he's at the trial. This is real life of the killer of his either son or daughter, right? And he's standing there, and the security, the judge's security's here, the court security on either side of him, and he has his moment to be able to address the killer, and he lets out this primal like scream, and he has a pencil. I don't remember if he grabbed it or had it, and he jumps over and he starts stabbing at the guy. And you're like, whoa, because the anger that he felt from looking at this guy and what was in his eyes and the way he was shaking. And you're like, they grabbed him and pulled him off quick enough. But that gave me a hell of a shoe in too, to what that can feel like, in that instinct. And then also, if you have a kid or a niece or a nephew, it helps a lot. You have to be able to tap into that, and it helps understand it. But yeah, there were many things over a long period of time that I used to just build and try to give me as much fuel as possible.
So really quickly, I want to ask, so obviously he goes on this whole arc, right? And becomes kind of like a completely different person. So for you, what was that like, or how do you view him differently, should I say, by the end of the film? Because ironically, we're back to him in the church. So how do you feel about that full kind of 360? And then of course, the second thing I have to throw in case I run out of time, you have an iconic line It's almost like Yippee-ki-yay with the Merry Christmas. People will
Yeah.
still know what I'm talking about towards the end, but I laughed out loud and I was like, oh my God, that line is gold, like to say it at that time. So just for the record, that was amazing, but
Thank you so much. And that was fully planned. We gave a nod to the one-liner, the wink at the
loved
80s,
it.
was Die Hard. Thank you so much. And then, yeah, at the end, he's very different than he was at the beginning. Although he's back in his sermon and preaching, he stood up for himself, right? And I think that's what's really nice. And I'm going to tell you that I'm a different person. You use what you can as an actor. You use what's around you. So for this character, he sort of had to be turned inside out, right? Filming during COVID, producing this thing, directing some. I haven't slept much in like 3 years with this movie since I found it. You shoot a 12-hour day, you go home, it takes an hour or so to get all that makeup off, and then you have to put out fires and deal because there's always stuff going on, right? Whether it's egos, you fighting for your creative choices, having to overcome a lot of BS, and then you throw in COVID. So I became a different person actually too. But I would use all that exhaustion and all that stuff that I had in the fear and the concerns and having to take control. Are we going to get shut down? Is this movie going to get made? And put it into my performance. So luckily that was great. It really worked in this case. I did that. And then me as a creative and as an actor, and I guess now a filmmaker, I can't even believe that I made this movie and this happened. When I took it on, I had no idea for the adventure that I was in for and how hard it would really be. I was able to be a leader. I think the work ethic thing comes for me pretty easy. I always felt I've had that. I think I can stay pretty positive and I can see the other side pretty well through thick and thin. I've always had a lot of ups and downs. I came from a tough place, but I think so that wasn't a problem. But maybe being a leader of a big 50-person crew and then also not being afraid to tell people if how you feel, and if you don't agree, rather than letting it sit there and change, because there's nothing more important than what comes on the screen, right? So being able to be open, have dialogue, and tell people no, or learn. I always learn. That's not a problem either. But and if they don't, if your views don't align, then maybe they're not right, or maybe you have to look at it a different way. But being open and being a leader, and the crew's everything. These guys were so loyal to me through COVID, through it's very hard. So I think, maybe that parallels my character a little bit too, in the sense of that he stood up for himself. I guess it's in a little bit of a different way, but you learn a lot from leading the charge in something like this. And I think I had no idea how much that I was actually absorbing from Dennis Leary, who was the star, the co-creator, the producer of Rescue Me. And I was around him for 100 episodes. So I think at the time I didn't realize it, but some of that seeped into me too.
Yeah, I mean, it's just crazy. You're so, like I said, you're so good in it. It was just so funny, like I said, to not see you with blood because you kind of forget because right away when it just everything starts happening and the chaos and craziness. But you are fantastic in this movie. I will just wrap with if there's anything that you want to tell fans to go see it. Um, I want everyone to go see this movie because you're just so good in it, and I just love it, and I just loved everything that you did as an
Thank
actor.
you so much. Yeah, you're very thoughtful and smart, and I think you picked up on things that I read from the script. You know what I mean? All these elements that you're referring to, and the little Easter eggs in there, and I can go over them all with you. We might have to talk after this because there's so many. But I think I really love the fact that what drew me to this too, besides all those wonderful things in the music and having the musicians be so good, so it's a film first and putting them in the film in a
I
non-gratuitous.
didn't even notice. I didn't
Yeah,
even notice. It
that
took
was
me
my
a second.
goal. That was really, really important, actually. So to me, have it be a movie first, but then we have this beautiful gold lining with great music, and then the Stranger Things guys scored it. Talk about the wink at the '80s, Kyle Dixon, Michael Stein. That was amazing. But I think at the end of the day, if people can go see this movie, have a fun time. It's a popcorn movie. It's a roller coaster ride, but maybe it can be a little thought provoking. And afterward, maybe you'd sit around and talk a little bit about the morality, the religion, the justice. Would you do it? Would you not? And that's kind of fun too. It has a bit of a drama in it, and some of the other genre elements that we sort of touched upon.
So I hope you guys enjoyed listening to Michael Lombardi talk about The Retaliators. The film is currently playing in theaters, so make sure you go check it out. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you're updated on all of our latest podcasts, and head over to our YouTube channel, hit subscribe so you're updated on all of our video content.